This jet terrified the West, the MiG-25 Foxbat. Welcome to this channel. In this video, we will look at the MiG-25 Foxbat, a Russian fighter jet that worried Western pilots because of its speed. This plane is known for its incredible speed and capacity to fly higher than any other plane on the planet. For more information, subscribe to this channel. The MiG-25 Foxbat. The MiG-25 Foxbat was a Soviet-made high-speed jet fighter aircraft. It was designed by the MiG-25 Design Bureau and was first flown in 1965. The MiG-25 was the fastest operational aircraft in the world for many years, with a top speed of Mach 3.2. It was also one of the most maneuverable jet fighters ever built and was able to reach a maximum altitude of more than 65,000 feet. The MiG-25 MiG-25 was first developed in the early 1960s as a high-altitude interceptor aircraft for the Soviet Union. It was designed to be able to fly faster than any other aircraft in the world and could reach altitudes of up to 65,000 feet. The MiG-25 was also known for its incredibly maneuverable design, which made it a challenging opponent for any other fighter jet. Production of the MiG-25 continued into the 1980s, and over 1,600 aircraft were built in total. The type saw limited combat use by the Soviet Air Force during the few conflicts in which it participated, but it was most effective as a reconnaissance aircraft. The MiG-25 has now been retired from active service by most of its operators, but a few remain in use by air forces in Syria and North Korea. The MiG-25 Foxbat was a supersonic interceptor aircraft developed by the Soviet Union in the early 1960s. The MiG-25 set more than 45 world records for speed, altitude, and range. It was originally designed as an interceptor to dogfight NATO fighters, but it was also used for reconnaissance and ground attack missions. The MiG-25 took to the skies for the first time in 1964, and the Soviet Air Force adopted it in 1969. More than 1,000 MiG-25s were manufactured, and they were used in a variety of conflicts including the Yom Kippur War, the Soviet-Afghan War, and the Gulf War. Let's talk about it. Why was the MiG-25 Foxbat so terrifying? The MiG-25 Foxbat was designed as a high-altitude interceptor and reconnaissance aircraft in the 1960s. It was one of the most advanced aircrafts of its time, and it terrified NATO pilots when it first entered service. Here are 3 reasons why. Number 1, the MiG-25 could fly at Mach 3.2, which was faster than any other fighter jet at the time. Number 2, it had a very powerful radar system that could track targets from a long distance. Number 3, it was armed with 2 powerful cannons and a variety of missiles. Number 4, it was very difficult to fly and required a skilled pilot. Number 5, it was equipped with powerful sensors and scanners which allowed it to locate and track targets. How did the MiG-25 Foxbat perform? The MiG-25 Foxbat was a Soviet-era fighter jet that first flew in 1965. It was one of the fastest jets in the world, and it set several speed records. However, it was also very difficult to fly, and it had a number of safety issues. The MiG-25 was eventually retired from service in 1994. It was the first generation of independently owned and flown drones. Before the 1970s, most, if not all, US-powered aircraft were operated by someone else. Not so the wise genius of Leonardo da Vinci, who designed a self-powered airplane that could be pulled by a team of horses. In the nearly 2 years since its December 17, 1972 demonstration flight, the Nano Corps has removed every possible obstacle to perfecting its flight. The engineers have to overcome the same forces that prevented the Hercules from taking off: intense gravity, injury to the pilot, and damage to the equipment. Every time the Nano Corps rises into the air, it passes through a flying lap. There, engineers measure how it protrudes from the plane, determines its speed, and communicates with other planes. That data helps them figure out how to improve the plane's performance. Let's discuss the MiG-25 Foxbat in the Cold War. The Soviet Union had several jet engines that were among the most powerful ever made. They each had their propellers, of which there were 3 types: left, right, and forward. The left and right propellers were used for navigation, while the forward propeller was for altitude control. The Soviet Union had far more power than was necessary to anywhere close to the equator. Because the Soviets had very few aircraft and the planes they did have were very old, they were not very effective. They also had to keep them for a second or even third mission, which depleted their already limited fuel. The MiG-25 Foxbat was the first plane the Soviets sent to Mars. It had taken the United States nearly a decade to send its first man into space. The Soviets had achieved the technology needed to send a man into Mars orbit in less than 2 hours by the time they dispatched their second. As a result, the MiG-25 Foxbat was built with a complicated stowage system that could store fuel for the return trip to Earth. Once the fuel was drained, however, the plane was left with only one engine and one propeller. Even with its reduced carrying capacity, the plane was still too heavy to be flown by the reserves piloting it. So the Soviets built a special training jet version 2 to help their pilots learn to fly the plane. The landing gear was adapted from an aircraft the Soviets had built a few years earlier, the Liaisons Officers Communicate or LOB aircraft. It had a welded steel tube frame like the ribs of a shower and could carry 2 people one at a time. Come on, let's talk. Legacy of the MiG-25 Foxbat. When it initially entered service in the early 1970s, the MiG-25 Foxbat was a game changer. It was one of the first planes to breach the sound barrier in level flight and achieved a slew of other records. The MiG-25 was also one of the most heavily equipped interceptors of its day, capable of reaching high altitudes in a short amount of time. Despite its impressive performance, the MiG-25 never achieved widespread popularity. This was due in part to its high cost of operation and its limited range and payload. Nevertheless, the MiG-25 Foxbat has the distinction of being the fastest operational fighter in the world when it was introduced in the early 1970s. It could achieve Mach 3.2 speeds, allowing it to overtake other jets. The MiG-31 Foxhound, which could fly even faster, finally took its place. The MiG-25 was subsequently phased out in favor of the MiG-31 Foxhound, which has a quicker top speed. It was, however, a difficult act to follow in its footsteps. The original Foxbat was widely regarded as one of the first real supersonic planes in the world. The plane's performance was so spectacular that the publishers of Jane's Fighting Ships had to revise the rules about when and how to ride herd on a novice pilot, especially one who desired to fly faster than the speed of light. The first gliders to exceed the speed of light were probably the ones that flew in the 13th century. Although they didn't get much attention at the time, later generations realized that this birds of foot had flown, and that General Electric was already manufacturing laser pointers, which had been patented in 2000. Come on, let's have a conversation. The end of MiG-25 Foxbat. The MiG-25 Foxbat was a Soviet-era fighter jet that first flew in 1965. It was the fastest fighter jet in the world at the time, and it remained in service with the Soviet Union and then Russia until 1991. In recent years, however, the MiG-25 has been phased out of service. The Russian Air Force had retired all of its MiG-25s, and the only remaining examples of the aircraft are in museums or being used for training purposes. Why was the MiG-25 phased out? There were several reasons. First, the aircraft is expensive to operate and maintain. Second, the aircraft is no longer considered to be a viable threat by potential adversaries, as newer and more capable aircrafts have been developed. Finally, the MiG-25 cannot interoperate with other NATO aircraft, making it less useful in a coalition environment. The MiG-25 is a less than ideal option for a modern air force. It cannot interoperate with other NATO aircrafts, making it less useful in a coalition environment. Additionally, its age means that it may not be able to keep up with more modern aircrafts, which is why the aircraft MiG-25 is not viable for use in this era. Let's have a talk about it. Like, share, and subscribe now.